Hey guys, so with this video we are going to be seeing if the Babe Ruth story is one of the worst movies of all time, as it's known as. So I've actually read the book that this is based on. It's by the same name, the Babe Ruth story. It was an autobiography. And, yeah, and let's just go into the plot and I'll give my thought throughout the movie, or throughout the story. So the movie, the story opens at a bar owned by Babe Ruth's father. His father and his mother are always busy working, and so they kind of just let Ruth run around, and gets so bad that one day the authorities come to take Babe Ruth away. One day a Catholic priest, his name is Brother Matthias, and he appears, and in the movie he persuades his father to allow him to take George Herman Ruth Jr., that's his real name. Yeah, they take him away to St. Mary's Institutional School for Boys. So Julia Ruth Stephen, she's the daughter of Babe Ruth, claimed her father, pretty much kind of confirming that his father did not watch him growing up, and he kind of became a delinquent. He would drink beer and, sometimes get into violent altercations. And so, yeah, he got sent to the school where he ultimately learned how to play baseball, and he gets very good at it. And he does, Brother Matthias, he is one of the most important people in Babe Ruth's life. You probably could say he was the father figure that he did not have. And so, yeah, he comes close to him, and ultimately Brother Matthias is the one who knows someone who, is involved in baseball. And ultimately, Babe Ruth ends up getting hired on to play for the Baltimore Orioles in 1914, and that's where he ultimately ends up getting his name, Babe. And there's a lot of, speculation as to how he got it, but in the book, Babe Ruth said that he do stupid stuff, and so he was going up and down on one of this elevator shaft and almost gets beheaded. And so they kind of called him like a babe in the woods, and so the name kind of stuck. And he was kind of the teacher's pet, I guess, if you will, of the the owner. And yeah, so that's how he ultimately got his name. But yeah, he played for the Orioles, and it ultimately doesn't really lead to anywhere. He eventually gets sold to the Red Sox after Dunn, the owner, experiences financial struggles, and so he won. He was involved in winning three World Series with the Red Sox, and so he did. He did help the Red Sox, but ultimately he gets sold to the Yankees, of course. And yeah, in the movie, after he kind of gets sold, there's this scene where because he was having trouble in games, because he was a pitcher, which I did not know at that time, that I've always ever known him as, hitting home runs, but apparently he was a pitcher, and he loved being a pitcher. But yeah, he would have trouble because people, at least in this movie, they could guess, what he's throwing. And eventually, in the movie, there's this woman, her name's Claire Hudson, and she tells him that he sticks out his tongue when he pitches, and which since it gave away his call, or what pitch he was going to throw. And yeah, that scene was it was, it felt like because she's the one he eventually marries, it felt very much like they only put the scene in there to try to introduce her as the love interest. And it wasn't good at all because they hate each other at the beginning. He calls her, she's pretty but not, to Gabby, and she says, you're not bright enough to be a Western Union boy, and so they really didn't like each other, and I guess that was supposed to be romantic. In the book, he does mention the whole sticking out his tongue when he pitches, but I think it was just like one line, and I think they did this just to introduce the woman. He ends up getting a $10,000 contract with the Yankees, and this is the next the next scene. It was when I'm pretty sure this is probably why people hate this movie. So one day a man brings his paralyzed son to the game, and Babe goes running by and he says hi, and the boy suddenly stands up. So it appears he, was able to cure the boy's paralysis. It was like a miracle. In the book, he does mention this. He talks about how a man had come to him, and well, actually, a man brought him to the game, and he did say hi to him, and the boy did set up, and his father was crying and saying that he hasn't set up in two years or so. He wasn't paralyzed. He just was having back trouble, but the doctor couldn't figure out what was going on, and so they're like, hey, they suggested he get a emotional shock, and so the man, he knew that his son loved Babe Ruth, and so he thought taking him to the game, taking him to meet Babe Ruth might help, and apparently it did. But in this movie, they make it seem like he was Jesus, and so yeah. He is with the Yankees. He ends up winning 7 pennants and 4 World Series, so 7 total World Series for Babe Ruth. Then there's the next scene, which is completely random yet again, and this one wasn't actually in the book, so I'm not sure exactly why they put it in here, other than to once again make him seem like he's just like Jesus. And then he hits a dog, and he takes the dog to the doctor instead of a vet. I'm not sure if they just didn't have a vet around, or he just assumed that doctors, because later on he says that dogs are the same as humans, and so he wants, when the doctor said he was not a vet, he was a doctor, and he's like, well, dogs are the same as humans. Yeah, it's kind of idiotic. Oh, man. But I'm not sure if they just made this up, or if the author, or the screenwriter for this movie was also the author for the book. So I'm wondering if that's just something he knows, but just didn't put in a book, but decided to put in a movie, but still felt kind of random. He takes the dog to the hospital. He ends up getting suspended for it, because he missed his game. He was not suspended for, taking a dog to the hospital. He's been suspended for barnstorming in the Northeast, and if you don't know what that is, they would go and play exhibition games. I think it was off season, between seasons, and that apparently is not, you're not supposed to do that, and so he got suspended. He was also very much into partying, and he did get suspended for partying. He would show up at 1 to 2, or sometimes not at all, and so yeah. And so he ends up going to a bar while he's being suspended, and then he gets into a fight with a gambler who wants him to throw a game, and So yeah, he ends up getting arrested. And I'm not sure if this was a reference to the Black Sox scandal. If you don't know, it was when the White Sox through the, was it 1912 World Series? And he mentioned how he thought that gave baseball a bad name, and so he did not like it. And so I'm wondering if that's referencing, that event. So he ends up going to play Santa at a children's hospital where he runs into Claire, who then tells him that his action affects the children of America. I'm assuming the bar fight is what she's talking about. Well, he does, with Babe Ruth did go to hospitals, and, he liked children. He liked helping children, so he would go and help children. You'd do charities. But in this scene, it feels like they once again need to introduce Claire and mentioning the whole, his actions, his actions, impact the children of America. In the book, he continually references children, how even sometimes when he's injured, he would play through it just because of the fans. He doesn't want to disappoint the children, so it felt like she didn't need to tell him that. It felt so forced. Miller Higgins, the manager of the Yankees, ends up coming to get Ruth back because they've had a bad season, and was able, and of course when he comes back, he's able to rally them to win the World Series, of course. But yeah, it feels like this is like he just completely just goes into something else during that season when he's suspended, when in reality, while suspended, he would continue to play, practice with the team and do exhibition games with them. He just didn't actually play in the games. So yeah, in the movie, he and Claire ends up getting married, and then Huggins dies from pinemia, that disease. So in Game 3 of the 1932 World Series, he promises the father of a sick kid that we'll hit a home run into a certain spot for the kid. He does say that this happens in the book, but it's kind of like accumulation of two like separate events. He talks about how he would call homers, and he could sometimes actually hit them in the spots he said he would. But this particular event in this scene, it actually was caused by, they were playing the Cubs, and the fans, I guess you could say, weren't very nice. And he said that they spit on him and his wife, and so he was kind of pissed off, and so he, to fuck with them, he was, said he was gonna, pointed to the spot that he was gonna hit it, and then on a third, throw, he ended up hitting it to that spot. So, that did happen, but not because of a kid. I think he does hit a homer for a kid, but it's, it's a separate event. Of course, after seeing this, seeing this on the news, the boy ends up getting better, starts to get better. Babe Ruth ends up retiring at 41, and then he gets a job as a manager for the Boston Braves. He talked about throughout the book how he continually tried to get a manager's job with the Yankees, with Red Sox, but they kept turning him down. He suspects because of his previous partying, they didn't think he'd be responsible enough, and so, yeah, he eventually gets a job with the Orioles, and or not the Orioles, the Braves. So he does play some in those games, but of course he's getting old, and he eventually can't take it anymore and ends up retiring again. Of course, that breaks the contract with the owner, and he is fired. But he says he was going to quit anyways. It's just the owner fired him before he could, because he realized that the owner was essentially using him he was only using him for his name to get people to come. And yeah, he just he was gonna quit because, you know, the owner wasn't gonna pay him, you know, his money. So yeah, he eventually starts feeling pain in his neck, and it's revealed that he has throat cancer. And after the news is released, he gets a letter from all his fans, and he goes to get an operation because of the fact he was so famous. He was actually able to get into an experimental program where he was one of the first to get the the drug and radiation treatment, so that, you know, combining the two, that was kind of what he's one of the first person they did it with. I'm not sure what exactly caused it, but previous in his life, he mentions how he had gotten a sore throat, and for the treatment of that sore throat, they like swabbed the back of his throat with nitrate silver. So I'm not sure if that could possibly have caused it. He's also been hospitalized before. He collapsed, and they at that time attributed it to his diet of like hot dogs and soda. And so I'm not sure if that was just a warning sign of, you know, impending doom. So, in the movie, the doctor who ends up doing the surgery is the one who operated on the dog. So the completely random ass coincidences, I guess. So the narration then encourages people to, you know, it just encourages people, and he claims that the reason that America loves the sport is because of Babe Ruth. So, yeah. Ooh, that was a lot. It felt so disjointed, my review, because that's exactly what it was. It felt disjointed. It got like, it didn't really have any connective flow throughout the movie. It felt like they just, you know, if you read the book, you can see that a lot of these scenes are sprinkled throughout the book. And it's sprinkled throughout a lot of baseball statistics, I guess. Because Babe Ruth would talk about every game, and we'd talk about like the hits, the home runs, everything. So unless you're a baseball fan, it's really boring. But then he would have these like 1 or 2 sentences sprinkled throughout of events that happened. And it felt like they took all of those and put it in this movie. But the problem is, it's not connected at all. It just feels like they're jumping to one, you know, random scene to another. So that's, I think, one of the issues with this movie. One of the other complaints was that there wasn't enough baseball scenes. But honestly, the movie felt very rushed. And so I don't think there was time to do a lot of, like, baseball scenes. And so, yeah. I mean, I'm not surprised. So yeah, like I said, the book was written by the man who also did the screenplay, Bob Considine. Can't even say that. He was a controversial writer. Times, the magazine, called him no great writer, but he is the harsling who regularly gets there first with the most words on almost any subject. So they even acknowledge, he was acknowledged in his, you know, by people at that time to not be a very good writer. And I'd have to agree, the book isn't that well written. And it would explain why the book came out like the same year that he died. Because the author is known for just rushing books out there. The Times profile also said that ghostwriter Considine dashes out his fast-moving autobiographies while the heroes still rate page 1, takes 1/3 of the author's royalty as is cut. His general's Wainwright's story was in print before Wainwright was out of the hospital, while Ted Lawson was still recovering from wounds suffered in Doolittle's Tokyo raid. Considine finished 30 Seconds Over Tokyo. So yeah, he was known for rushing out books before, I guess, the popularity of the person died down. And he ultimately was estimated to make $100 million, or not $100 million, $100,000 annually. Like I said before, I thought the Babe and Clear scenes were forced. I feel like they just wanted them to get to know each other because he's eventually going to marry her, so they had to find somewhere to put him in, and they're terribly, it's terribly written. And they have terrible chemistry, zilch chemistry between the actors, and so it does not help. One of the complaints, continual complaints, and something I also noticed, that he's kind of portrayed as this dunce, not too smart, this bumbling idiot. When he isn't portrayed that way in the book, he has a specific way of speaking that you can tell he's from New York, but he doesn't really come off as an idiot like he does in the movie. John McCartan of the New Yorker says, Mr. Bendix, the actor, resembles Mr. Ruth not at all, and he certainly does the hitter an injustice by representing him as a kind of Neanderthal fellow. I'm not sure if that was the actor's fault or if that was what he was directed to do, but yeah, I didn't really like the portrayal either. They also kind of, I felt, portrayed him as Jesus, as this like savior. He can do no wrong at all. And someone else mentioned that as well. So the monthly film bulletin of Britain wrote, this film illustrates the American habit of canonizing baseball players. For apparently Babe Ruth to not only perform remarkable feats on the field, but could also perform miracles by curing the sick and the crippled. The power is demonstrated 4 times in the film, each in an increasingly embarrassing manner. And William Bendix portrayed Babe Ruth as a half-wit giant without any redeeming pathos. Oh, that's kind of funny. They were embarrassing. And so, at first I thought it was in bad taste that they ended up rushing the movie out this quickly after his illness, because the movie and the book are released in the same exact year. And it's the same year that he dies. But apparently, the movie was made after news of Ruth's declining health, and it was released 3 weeks after his death. But he actually did have input on the book, so he knew about it and he helped write it, so it wasn't like the author just was, taken advantage, by, immediately writing a book. He was involved, and he was able to get the book published, and the movie, he was able to see the movie before he ended up dying. Doesn't really say what he thought of it, but he did see it. Something else. Something else they forgot to mention. He did have a first wife. He mentions her in the book twice. Once to tell her that he's married her, or tell her that he married her. Once to tell her that she died. So that was the 2 times he mentioned her in his book. So that should tell you the importance of her in his life. Which is funny, because they married as teens. One day he talks about how he was he was visiting this cafe that he visits all the time, and he just decides to ask her one day to marry him. And she's like, okay. So yeah. So they get married as teens, and they adopt a girl. Her name's Dorothy. And she has claimed that she's actually the biological daughter of Babe, from a mistress that he had. So, don't know if that's true or not, but that's what she says. So, they ultimately end up separating about 1925, supposedly because of his cheating and his neglect, which he only mentioned her twice in the book, so I guess that holds weight. And he, team co-owner, telling Hast Cap Hudson, asked him to tone down his lifestyle. Ruth said, "I promise to go easier on drinking and to get to bed earlier, but not for you. $50,000 or $250,000 will I give up women. They're too much fun." And he supposedly said this while he was married to his first wife. So obviously there's no doubt he's cheating. He was cheating while with her. I mean, the detective the Yankees hired detectives to trail him because he would continually go and get into trouble. And and they said that he had been with up to 6 women while they were trolling him. So yeah, Helen ends up dying in a fire in January of 1929, and some say that he murdered her. There were rumors floating around. At the time that she died, she was living with her lover because they were separated. And she had taken sleeping pills and went to sleep, and somebody called the police when they saw smoke coming from her apartment, and she died of the examiner said she died of smoke inhalation, and the inspector blamed faulty wiring for the fire and shoddy repair work. But I'm not exactly surprised rumors were floating around, because about 3 months after she died, he ends up marrying his second wife, Claire Merritt Hudson. So yeah, he was a cheater. But a fun fact, completely random, in 2018, President Donald Trump announced that Ruth, along with Elvis Presley and Antion Celia, would posthumously receive the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Then you realize Donald Trump's a fucker that pardoned a war criminal, so being honored by him isn't really that big of a accomplishment, I guess you could say. Oh, well, that was the review of the Babe Ruth story, the book and the movie. It was not as bad as a lot of the movies I've seen, but then I've seen some dog shit movies. So yeah, it was not good. I mean, it was very disjointed and terrible writing. Yeah, so I guess you could say it's still one of the worst movies of all time, but not one of the worst movies I've seen. So yeah, if you want to go check it out, you can make your own opinion on it. So yeah, so if you did like this review, get a like, subscribe to get notification for all the videos I'll be doing. You guys have a nice night. Stay safe out there. Talk to you later.